and welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast sponsored by Infoprolearning. As always, I'm your host, Nolan Hout. Joining me today, we have Charlie Franklin. Stumbling already. Charlie started his career at Mercer, a leading global HR consulting firm, where he was advising companies on compensation strategy and a lot of Fortune 500 companies in technology, finance, life science, and energy. After that, he was over at Juniper Networks working with executive compensation and people strategy. And then he moved over to a small company that we all know called Workday, where he led HR, M&A, and a lot of global mobility. After that, he took all that knowledge and co-founded a company called Compa, which we're really excited to learn more about. We'll let him talk a little bit more about what that company does. And we're going to talk throughout this podcast, not just about the technology, obviously, but about compensation, which is a newer topic. We haven't touched a ton on compensation in the podcast before. So I'm really excited to get into it because, as we all know, how people are compensated really, in fact, impacts how they show up at work. And that relates to how they perform at work and everything else surrounded that. So it's super important. If you can't compensate your people correctly, everything else becomes a challenge. With that, super excited to kick it off. Let's meet Charlie. Charlie, welcome to the podcast.
Nolan, thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for listening today. As he shared, my name is Charlie Franklin. I'm co-founder and CEO at Compa. A little bit about what Compa does. We are a compensation intelligence platform that serves the largest enterprises in the world. We provide real-time market data for compensation professionals to understand what's happening in the market today, use that information to set compensation strategy. We serve companies in the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 that need great precision and real-time information to understand how to compete for talent in today's very fast-moving markets. So thank you for having me, Nolan.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to kind of, start right off with a question you mentioned is how to compete for talent in the marketplace. What is you're in this world, obviously, you're talking every day. What does the marketplace look like today for talent?
Yeah, it's a complicated market for talent today. And I would characterize it as very fast moving. Parts of the market are hot, like in AI and AI engineering. Other parts we're seeing more choppiness as companies evaluate the talent profile and footprint that they need and the current market conditions and uncertainty that we all see and hear about every day. And so as a result, you can think of generally compensation teams need to balance a three-legged stool of considerations: cost, competitiveness, and fairness. And which one of those legs you optimize for at any given time can change with respect to the company's strategy, but also which part of the business they're investing compensation in and which markets they're competing in. So it's dynamic. I think it's been a challenge, especially for the past 5 years, and just continues to be in 2025.
So what are your thoughts on, it's interesting because you mentioned, the talent where it's the hottest right now is anything kind of an AI tech. I think cyber's continuing to drive some awareness. But there's the idea, right, of like AI is killing our jobs. AI is killing this, that, and the other. Now, something that I've kind of been touting is, well, I feel AI is going to be a leveler for a lot of organizations, which is why they're all out there looking to get that, is because you can develop an app. I was talking to a gentleman who started an LMS company. He was at like a Silicon Valley starter day, and he was like, I felt so bad for these kids. They got up there, they're like, we've been working on this for 2 years. We're so excited to show it to you. And I turned to my buddy and I was like, I could use AI to do this in 2 weeks now. So it has taken that time to market has just shrunk so much. So if we believe that technology is going to kind of be leveled with AI, it seems like talent really becomes your competitive advantage. Would you agree?
I would definitely agree and add that it's only a leveler for companies that embrace it faster. We're seeing, I would characterize the market has shifted in the world of HR tech even over the past 12 months, even the past 6 months, where a year ago, if you talk about AI and HR tech, there's kind of a, don't go there. I don't know if it's safe. I don't know if it's secure, private, to now almost a mandate, and in some cases explicitly a mandate. And we see these in news and we hear it from our customers where they say no net new headcount until you've fully adopted or experimented with an AI solution. And so I think for teams that are experimenting with AI, both to create productivity gains for the existing footprint, but also to change how they work, are going to discover that there are new ways of working that can accomplish their business goals in nonlinear ways that they never expected.
So when we're in this world where the tech is changing super fast, the demands on the people that we're trying to, help are changing really fast. How are like leading companies adopting their compensation models and other hiring models to try to get that talent or keep the talent? I guess it's both fold. It's both, I would think.
Yeah, so I'll actually answer that in two ways, and they're kind of two different topics. One is compensation professionals are adapting their strategies to compete for AI engineering talent. Now, that's a different problem set. That is, how do I deploy my comp strategy in a very difficult, sometimes zero-sum characterized talent market to make sure that we're set up to adopt and move through this tech wave with success? I think what you're asking, though, is really for the practice of compensation for the professionals in this industry. How does their day-to-day work change? In compensation, you have a lot of analysts that are in spreadsheets crunching numbers. I'll credit the turn of phrase here to a team that we work with at Roblox and their leader, Supriya Bari, who says the work of a compensation analyst is transforming into a compensation scientist. And you can think about it in simple terms of, if today an analyst is writing VLOOKUPs in Excel spreadsheets, tomorrow they will be managing agents to complete that analysis for
Right.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would just add too that for those who are less familiar with the compensation world, they're effectively asset managers of billions of dollars to spend for their companies, what they pay for their talent. These are small, highly leveraged teams that have an outsized impact on the company's largest line of expense. And so looking for ways to scale their impact has huge returns, both for just how they work day to day and the ultimate outcomes for the business.
Yeah, and Charlie, if you don't mind, I mean, digging a little bit more into just kind of the grassroots of compensation, because I think a lot of people on this are mostly, in leadership positions, and so they would have their own reports and head count attached to it, and they're kind of having to make these tough conversations with raises, promotions, things like that. How can a company leverage these compensation experts in this compensation data, right? So I'm the head of learning, I'm the CLO of Pepsi. I have, gosh knows how many employees. How do I start leveraging compensation data, or these compensation people, or Compa for that matter, to better manage one of my biggest expenses, my people?
Yeah, absolutely. Compensation touches every part of the workforce and employee experience. So it connects with decisions we make about hires, decisions about promotions, our career paths via the career architecture, which compensation teams typically manage. It's integrated across what everyone is trying to do, whether that's in learning or talent management, or in finance or talent acquisition. And so I think the way say a learning leader would embrace compensation data is understanding how is the market changing for the most critical skill sets that they are trying to bring in or move within their organization. And then how does performance tie to the compensation philosophy and outcomes and market conditions that are present today. So if you are a pay for performance organization, and you use like a typical ranking, 1 through 5 system of talent, or a 9 box or something like that, tight collaboration with the compensation team on what are the outcomes we want to get with performance. Is that in base salary? Is that in some form of an incentive? What types of behavior does that drive? These are all the considerations where they could take into account not just the tight collaboration with their compensation team, but actually market information as well.
Yeah, and I would assume that'd be, and I mean, because I feel like the landscape has just changed everywhere around compensation, right? I mean, you must have been at the forefront of some of the hard, and these are the hardest conversations. I feel like I can just think of my own compensation, conversations of we all went through it with remote of like, well, John's in San Francisco, he's technically in San Francisco, so he's at X scale. Julie is in Lincoln, Nebraska. No offense to Lincoln, Nebraska, but like the cost of living is probably a little bit lower for Julie. So you've really been at the forefront. What do you see? Like, what are those trends that you think we're going to see this year, kind of next year and the following year that are kind of like those challenge? Like, what are those future challenges that we need to be prepared to solve? Like, remote workforce, which maybe we haven't even really solved yet. But what are some of those things that you think are coming down the pipe?
Yeah, the world of comp, for those of us in it, we've always found it interesting. However, over the past 5 years, the profession has been undergoing multiple simultaneous shocks to how comp is practiced that just violate some of the underlying principles we've all known and followed for decades. So you raise the example of remote work. Typically, the cost of labor, what we pay people, tracks pretty closely to the cost of living, how much it costs in Lincoln, Nebraska versus San Francisco. We're observing in some places shifts in that relationship. The most recent example we published an article on recently is the rest of California is now as expensive as San Francisco. So
Oh,
everybody
right,
knows that you
right.
pay higher to hire somebody in the Silicon Valley. The cost of living is lower in other parts of California. However, the cost of labor, the talent that you're paying for in San Diego and Los Angeles and Santa Barbara, and these have all caught up to the Bay Area. So that's an example, sort of a micro example just within the state of California. We're seeing in terms of geography as the world shifted towards remote work and then kind of pulled back, fast moving changes with respect to how do you think about grouping different cities into geo tiers and setting strategy for each tier. The international compensation markets and movement have been unusual. We're seeing acceleration in costs in typically low cost markets like India. But there are other examples. That's remote work and location. There is pay transparency laws have accelerated
Right.
since 2021.
Yeah.
Pay equity has been a focus and now has kind of pulled back in the last 6 months, but still institutionalized in most companies. Inflation changes how people think about pay. The talent shortages, do you remember the Great Resignation? That changed how we think about pay. And of course, the unusual economic conditions we're in. Nobody's calling it a
I don't
recession,
know what
but
you're
let's say,
talking about.
yeah, all the layoffs, all the tariffs, it's making it harder to plan. And so as a result of all of these shocks to the system and compensation, what some people might have seen as like a dusty corner of HR has a spotlight shown on it.
Yeah.
And we are rethinking some of the core principles of what we know is true. And the companies that are adapting fastest, I think, are making their CFOs happier with respect to cost, able to more effectively compete for talent, and producing an experience for their employees that's more fair. So it's all about speed now.
How, speaking of speed, and I think Charlie, that's how we got connected. I think there was an article on Forbes that I wrote about kind of how skills is reshuffling and talent is reshuffling and labor is reshuffling, and it's all about speed and momentum. And one of the things you talked about, like and I'm not sure how much of it you see, but as one of the big challenges that I hear from our leaders is I would love to hire, the three people, and I'd love to pay them, 120,000 a year, whatever it is. But I can't get on a year-long commitment from my team. Like hiring a resource for a year has actually become a very scary proposition because of the volatility of the market. How are organizations trying to, like, are you seeing anything in a compensation model perspective to try to leverage more of on-demand talent, flexible talent, contractors, vendors, things like that?
Yeah. So the way this is manifesting into day-to-day practice is the compensation teams who are in HR are spending a lot more time with their buddies over in finance.
Hmm.
And there's always been some amount of collaboration there in terms of workforce planning. What we're seeing is as the um, reliability of our forecasts and plans degrade in a more uncertain market, those teams have to spend more time together replanning or just making choices over a shorter time horizon. And so the compensation team that may have been almost sort of more insulated in its ivory tower, just in its numbers, buried in its spreadsheets, is becoming a more integrated partner with talent acquisition, with learning and development, with finance. Um, and relatedly, I think the spotlight is shown more on their function.
Hmm.
Increasingly, compensation teams have to be great communicators, have to present more change management, have PR challenges. And so
Yeah.
it's really changing how the work is practiced in a way that I think will ultimately be better for the companies and the employees. Much needed innovation coming into the space.
And so speaking of that, just that space, you talked a lot about how AI is having a macro impact on everything that you do, but within the compensation world, right, of the actual day-to-day jobs of these people, how is AI transforming your world? Like, so as an example, how is Compa using AI to support some of these challenges presented by AI? It's like Groundhog Day or whatever you want to call it. You're just
Yeah.
in this reverb.
I know. It's just the bots talking to each other. We, um, so Compa is a compensation intelligence company. Our mission is to connect and analyze all the world's comp data to power smarter decisions. Um, AI presents an opportunity for compensation teams to scale their intelligence out to more decisions. When a company
Mm.
that hires or has, 100,000 employees makes pay decisions across those billions of dollars of spend, those decisions are fragmented into hundreds, thousands of discrete pay decisions,
Right.
whether that is a recruiter making an offer, a manager making
Right.
a promotion, whatever it
Yeah.
is. And the pre AI era approach is to set very broad guardrails with respect to managing pay. So it might be a salary range with a 50% spread. Hey, as long as you pay between 80 and 120K, you're kosher.
Mhm.
AI and the proliferation of real-time data presents an opportunity to manage compensation outcomes with much greater precision, whether that is
Mhm.
aligning them to the market, ensuring that you're paying for performance, dialing in costs for specific skills that matter. Uh, what AI accomplishes is it relieves the administrative burden of complexity that it would take to get those kinds of outcomes. And
Right.
so, like in its simplest terms, I pull it back to something abstract and basic. If you imagine that compensation teams touch 10 or 15% of all the pay decisions in a given year, pre AI, now they have a chance to touch 100% of decisions. And
Mhm.
you can start to ask the question, what does that make possible?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So the reach is almost instantaneous because there's no added cost. I'm sure there's a tiny, somewhere in there, but like the added cost of being able to take this insight across every person has gone down. That's interesting. And one of the things that we talked about before this was kind of this the idea, and something that L&D talks a lot about, is the skills and how are we connecting skills to compensation. And we were having a fun back and forth about, well, if we're paying people for skills and people just decide to go and take the accountant decides to take the SAP training course and learn how to be a LMS admin, whatever it is. Are you responsible for paying for that skill now because they now have a skill and you have to be equal compensation for that skill? So, how are you seeing? I mean, I would think and a lot of compensation models, I guess I'm not 100% sure what all the factors were to say Nolan Hout earns this much money versus something else. But are you seeing now a bigger trend of companies saying, okay, we now need kind of skill to be the kernel in which we're going to start compensating people on? Like that's our benchmark. Is that starting to eke into the conversations?
Yeah, yeah, it is starting to happen. It's complicated. And skills, so skills as a domain of investment is inherently cross-functional. There are use
Mhm.
cases across an entire enterprise. I think that one of the earliest examples where there's great opportunity in skills is in the L&D world of how can we upskill our workforce. We've seen applications around internal labor marketplaces of how do we move talent more efficiently and create more interesting career paths. As skills creeps into compensation, it is colliding with skepticism,
Mm.
where these folks who are responsible for setting those guardrails are now confronted with, what is a job? What are the components, the skills that make up that job, and how are they changing, and what do we want to pay for? And
Mm.
so I break down in compensation, I break down the world of skills into two areas: policy and market. Policy is, for example, a salary range. It's something that we say, this is what we want to pay for.
Yep.
Baking skills into policy is very complicated. It
Mm.
requires close collaboration with the other functions, but also a coherent strategy of what is it that we want to um, promote, attract, retain, and pay for, and why. So I think most compensation teams, even the most progressive in the world, are in the very early end of the maturity curve with
Right.
respect to how skills are brought into compensation policy. On the other side of it is the market. What we're observing via a product that Compa introduced last year called skills-based market data
Mm.
is you can easily detect major differences in pay based on the presence of certain skills, especially when they're hot. So
Mm.
even in the, for example, in the AI engineering world, there is a big difference whether an engineer is building a chatbot or building a self-driving car, but they're both AI engineers. So how do you detect the difference? One place to look is in skills. So
Right.
there's a skill associated with self-driving and auto technology called computer vision. We observe that the computer vision skill and autonomy and some other related technologies are commanding huge premiums
Mm.
over certainly software engineering and systems engineering, but even AI engineering itself. And so whether those companies paying those premiums are trying to do that via policy is a different question, but the market is clearing at different rates. And so um, I'd say at a minimum, compensation teams need to understand what are the differences in market rates based on skill, how that gets translated into policy, much more complicated question.
So I feel like if I'm in HR training, whatever function is owning the skill within the company, I feel like you would be my best friend because if I can go to my software and say, listen, if somebody knows AI vision, I have to pay them 4x more from the market. If I'm able to take this person who's building a chatbot right now and I'm able to embed that skill within that person to actually have them grow that skill. Yes, this investment of 10 grand for that skill looked crazy, but considering they pay an extra 40, 50 grand, if we can even get them in the first place, that's a wonderful conversation for the person to have. And that's a wonderful conversation for wherever you fit in this talent spectrum to be able to actually put dollars and cents to the development of the skill, which I'm guessing kind of is that mecca for those people of if we can attach some dollar figures to skills, we can then start making really sound investment strategies of which are these skills we can invest in, how quickly can we get that ROI back. Again, that's assuming that we can judge their skills and we know their skills and there's a lot of other factors. But yeah, I would assume they would be your best friend. You're who I would go to if I was developing training programs. And I would say, how much have I improved my workforce? What is the value of my workforce now?
I absolutely the missing piece of information we've had is price. What are the different prices for
Yeah.
skills? And in the context of that three-legged stool for comp on competitiveness, cost, and fairness, these all integrate with skills. So you might say,
Right.
hey, in order to compete, we do need to pay a premium for the computer vision. Well, how does that come back to cost? We think we're going to hire 200 people, but if it's 50% more expensive than we thought it was, maybe we can't afford to hire 200, or maybe we need to go back and ask, is it worth the bet to spend that much more
Hmm.
money? So that brings in the workforce planning and finance side of this, of what exactly do we want to go pay for, and is it worth it ROI wise? On the fairness end of it too, a lot of companies spend a careful investment to make sure that they have equal fair pay across their company. Well, if these two people are in the same job
Yeah.
profile and are paid completely different rates, skills can, in economic or statistics terms, become the missing independent variable that
Mm.
explains an adjusted variance in pay. And so there's, when we get skills right, there's a way to integrate it across the entire comp strategy. That the hard part is the assumption we're both making, which is can we actually understand what those skills are?
Yeah, and I think that is the rub. Has always been the rub. I mean, with AI, like I tell people that the old way of trying to define a skill or what somebody needs in a skill was really really hard. It sounds simple as an idea, but when you look at HR, L&D trying to say, okay, what are the skills that a marketer needs? Okay, well, they got to go to like who? The CMO, like the chief marketing officer, because they're going to set the strategy of what skills that they're going to value in the future. And so that person essentially has to dig deep and be as embedded as you into defining the skill because it's them who values the skill. Like they place the value on the skill. And so like by the time that you used to be able to agree, it's really easy maybe at like a couple roles, but when you dig down to, okay, well, how does this role, how does this skill connect to this skill? Getting everybody to agree is nearly impossible. It almost just takes your CMO to put her foot down or put his foot down and say, listen, we're never going to agree. This is what we're going with. It's the best we got. That's what, and AI is kind of doing that. They're saying, we don't know, but we have a pretty good idea that these are the skills. Like based off of what we see, at least it's a starting point. So I think people are a little bit more willing to trust it. But then comes the even harder question of, do we really know whether we've matched this person's skill?
Yeah,
And that is the landmine that comes with attaching pay to a skill is your ability to match it.
that's right. S- Um, so everything starts with demand. What does the business need to execute its strategy? And so just like you described, you do need the CMO or the head of engineering to define, hey, what are the skills we need to bring into this organization to produce this new piece of tech or enter this new market? After that, it's a marketplace of skills, and
True.
marketplaces are characterized by
Yeah.
supply and demand and price. And so I think you need to unflatten the concepts of skill demand and skill supply, where we might say, hey, we really need to bring in Kubernetes into our tech stack. So let's take stock. Who here knows Kubernetes? Nobody. Okay. So we can do a build, buy, rent strategy,
Yeah.
right? Do we upskill our existing workforce? Do we go hire in people to understand it? Um, do we use outsourced help with that? And so um, underpinning that build, buy, rent decision is, what do we want to pay for? And so it all comes back to comp. Comp is, it's that moment when you don't just say I love you, you show it. This matters a lot to people. It's a basic need for us as individuals and for our organizations responsible to our shareholders. And so, um, yeah, a world of solving skills for your organization without understanding cost is an incomplete exercise.
Yeah, 100% agree. Well, Charlie, and with that, what a great way to end. Thank you for spending time with us and teaching us a little bit about your world, where I certainly haven't spent as much time, but obviously I value it because I have to pay for things just like everybody else does. So I think you'll find an audience. I don't know, an audience that doesn't care about compensation in one form or the other. So thank you for educating us a little bit on the topic.
Thanks for having me, Nolan.
Of course.